Okay, so just one last check with the group. I want to make sure that if you are looking to record today's event, that you have the ability to record. We're going to get started here unless I see any last minute messages here. And it does not look like I do have any. Oh, no, I do have one from Omar. Omar, okay. That looks like we've got everybody covered. Okay, thanks everyone as we go through that process. I know it's a little clunky. We appreciate you guys showing up today. I just want to introduce myself. I'm Rich Chapman, Policy Advisor and Chief of Staff for the Community Safety Division. And just want to thank you guys again for all being here with us. This has been a busy week for the mayor. He wanted to ensure that he communicate with journalists and reporters and the public about the discussions and progress made in relation to one of his key priorities, community safety. As a friendly recap of some of this week's events, the mayor worked with his colleagues in 2 work sessions focused on advancing immediate and long-term solutions to increase the safety of our communities and addressing gun violence. In this week's work session, the mayor heard from subject matter experts on mental and behavioral health, gun violence prevention and intervention, trauma-informed care, policing, and emergency response and dispatch models. The mayor took part in the city's 5th mediation session with Portland Police Association. The mayor also met with Portland Police Bureau Office of Violence Prevention and the Division of Community Safety to coordinate efforts between the city's bureaus and identify ways to speed up public safety strategies approved by Portland City Council. I'll be helping to facilitate a question and answer after the mayor shares his reflections on the discussions and the progress made to date. Please hold your questions until the end. At the end, when you have a question, please use the raise your hand function and I'll call on you to ask a question. Now I'd like to hand it over to Mayor Ted Wheeler. Thank you all. And Mayor, you'll need to start your video function from there.
All right, good. I think we've got it. Can you see me and hear me?
Yeah, everything was good.
All right, good. Thank you. Good morning. And thank you, Rich, for facilitating this. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I am joined by Police Chief Chuck Lovell for the question and answer period. And though we are focusing on community safety today, it's an important issue. I want to make sure that I will stick around as long as people need to answer the questions that I can at the end of this. During the last year, 283 people have been injured by gunfire in the city of Portland. 46 people have lost their lives to gun violence perpetrated by another individual. A person is behind each of these statistics. Every loved one lost causes grief, fear, frustration, and in some instances, more violence. Last March, when I worked with the Interfaith Peace and Action Collective and other community leaders to propose a gun violence reduction plan, I said we needed to act then so that we would have the time to prepare for what looked like a deadly summer ahead. We've been living that summer. The city is on a trend to have its deadliest year in decades. And while urban gun violence is impacting cities throughout the United States, we are not other cities. This is our home, and we need to do better here. At the beginning of this year, as your mayor, I announced my 4 key focus areas: livability, community safety, equitable prosperity, and houselessness. Today, I'll focus on what we've done, and more importantly, perhaps, what more I will ask of my colleagues, staff, and partners in what we can do collectively to restore community safety, both in the near term as well as in the longer term. I'm going to organize our progress in alignment with the city's Community Safety Transition Plan. Council held our second 2-hour work session on this plan just yesterday afternoon. These areas are the following: refocus, reform, and restaff. With regard to refocusing, first, we're continuing to focus on supporting our policies, programs, and investments that help our communities thrive, from housing stability to food security to support for local businesses. We must take this holistic approach to support all parts of our community in order to identify and address root causes and reduce the probability of violence in our city. We must recognize that prevention efforts require time and investment to disrupt the cycle of violence. So too, the city must respond to the emergency calls that we receive now. I've added public safety specialists, more than doubling the number during my administration. I've also doubled the officers in the Police Bureau's Behavioral Health Unit. I've supported creating the Portland Street Response, and I directed the creation of the Enhanced Community Safety Team in the Police Bureau, which focuses on the investigation of shootings. I also supported the $6 million ordinance passed by City Council in April that directed the Office of Violence Prevention and the Community Safety Division to provide funding to community-based organizations who are focused on gun violence reduction and increasing the number of park rangers. Finally, as mentioned in yesterday's work session, the Community Safety Division is working in partnership with other bureaus to conduct a study to review where current call assignments go to better align needs. And of course, since the earliest days of my administration, I've been a strong champion of the 311 call system so that we could deflect calls that are currently going towards the Police Bureau and other responders to more appropriate responders where we're able to do that. The second area is reform. The new Community Safety Division, under the leadership of Director Mike Myers, will lead a ground-up approach that engages both community and bureau staff to ensure the Police Bureau's work is transparent, effective, accountable, and fair to all Portlanders. It's essential that the city's strategies, prevention and intervention, are done in partnership with our community. Portland has a rich history of civic engagement and advocacy, and we're honoring that history here. In April, my colleagues expressed approval to establish the Focus Intervention Team, designed to solely focus on the response, investigation, and intervention known cases of gun violence. They also approved the Focus Intervention Team Community Oversight Group, otherwise known as FITCOG, to ensure that the voices of community members most impacted by gun violence would be woven into the Focused Intervention Team's work. The Community Oversight Group is meeting regularly. It had its most recent meeting just last night. Over the last 5 months, the Police Bureau has successfully internally sourced funding to the Focused Intervention Team and Focused Intervention Team Community Oversight Group. Commissioner Maps, Ryan, and myself nominated a dozen diverse members with lived experience to serve on the Focused Intervention Team Community Oversight Group, which is independently operated from the Police Bureau. This group of dedicated members will provide a valuable community lens to Focused Intervention Team's work and help the city live out our core values of transparency, equity, anti-racism, collaboration, and communication. Chief Lovell identified and appointed 3 highly respected leaders, both inside the Bureau and within the community, to serve on the command level of the Focused Intervention Team: Commander Nakamura, Sergeant Dulio, and Captain Crooker. In addition, the Focused Intervention Team is now recruiting 2 sergeant positions. We've already received 5 quality applications for those 2 positions. The Focused Intervention Team Community Oversight Group will work alongside the Police Bureau to inform hiring decisions by participating in applicant interviews for the 2 sergeant positions, as well as the 12 to 14 officer positions. We anticipate that the Focused Intervention Team will be fully staffed and activated by late November. The third area is re-staff. In the short term, I will know the amount of the available resources within the fall budget management process, sometimes called the fall bump. I'll know the numbers by the end of this month. Pending available resources, I will submit a proposal in the fall bump to fund a rehire initiative for Portland Police, which allows us to quickly increase the number of active officers on a limited duration basis. An estimated 80 officers are eligible to return to work and will play a vital role in better distributing the current workload to improve response times, as well as prevent burnout amongst our current officers. The return of some of these officers will also assist in supporting the Police Bureau's work as we pursue longer-term staffing initiatives. The Bureau is dedicated to long-term staffing in a way that's reflective of the community they serve and ensuring that we're attracting and hiring from a diverse applicant pool. In the long term, the Community Safety Division is working with multiple bureaus to evaluate the inputs from the Refocus study, the comprehensive reform efforts, and will conduct an evidence-based study to form options on staffing levels. These options regarding how to improve response times and other police services will be presented to the community for input and will result in staffing recommendations as well as a long-term staffing plan. We will be coming back to council with these evidence-based staffing recommendations for consideration in the upcoming annual budget process, which starts soon. Before I close, I want to thank the hardworking police officers that are willing to serve our community in spite of the significant personal risk that's involved. I also want to thank the dozens of Portlanders who serve on community oversight boards, advisory committees, and who provide valuable input to our public safety process. And finally, I want to thank Portlanders for looking out for each other and continuing to support one another day after day. We know this work is going to take time, but it's critical that everybody understand the importance of using evidence-based approaches to reducing gun violence. Truly sustainable reform is cyclical. We listen, we learn, and then we implement. And then the cycle begins again to ensure that the systems that we put in place, the trainings we provide to officers, and the safety services we deliver match the needs of our community. Above all else, we have to remain flexible and responsive to community needs. I'll be providing regular updates as these initiatives progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Now, for all of our journalists joining us today, we do want to have an open and frank conversation here, and the mayor has allowed for questions to be asked. Police Chief Chuck Lovell will also be available to answer questions. So with that, we'll have you guys use the raise your hand function for those questions. So you can go ahead and begin now. And Alex, I see your hand up first.
Great, thanks, Rich. And my question's for the mayor. You mentioned the retire rehire program and focusing on increasing the capacity of or the number of police officers. I'm curious if you're speaking about filling currently vacant positions or increasing the total number of positions at the Police Bureau.
So I think what I'll do is turn that over to the chief because he has a better understanding of the specific dynamics. So Chief, I'll let you answer that question.
Hi, the retire rehire would allow us to bring back officers who would otherwise retire this July. We currently have about 80 officers who will be eligible in July to retire. Instead of seeing them leave and our numbers decrease, it will allow us a vehicle to bring them back to keep them from leaving and prevent what would be essentially a retirement cliff in July. If we were to roll it back to August, where we had this last big pool of retirees, then that would potentially allow us to add additional numbers from there.
Thank you, Chief.
And Maxine, I see you up next.
Thank you. This is for the mayor. You referenced the need for 311 to absorb some of the non-emergency calls, and I just wondered, is there a time frame for 311 to do so, and will you be seeking more funding for 311 to increase staff?
So there is a time frame, but I'm about to disrupt that time frame by moving it forward. I don't yet know what the resources are for the fall bump process. I'm told by the budget office I'll know probably by the end of next week. If there are resources available, I absolutely expect to ask my colleagues for a significant increase in the funding that goes to 311 so that we can speed that process up. It's critical to the refocusing effort, along with supporting a broader deployment of the Portland Street response, obviously having that 311 system up and operating and deflecting some of the non-emergency calls that are going to the police bureau and other first responders, going to other agencies and other types of first responders beyond the police and the fire bureau, obviously will help us.
So do you support expanding the Portland Street response citywide?
I do, and I'm currently working with Commissioner Hardesty on the next iteration of that. As you can imagine, there are a number of logistical obstacles, but we're working well together, and I believe we will have a proposal to bring to council, hopefully as soon as the fall bump.
Thank you.
My belief is that if Commissioner Hardesty and I can reach agreement on that deployment, we shouldn't have too much difficulty gaining the necessary support from the rest of the council.
Ray Gazaway, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. First off, Mayor, thanks for the time. I would love to do this more frequently. Community Safety Director Mike Myers said in Thursday's work session that the city has not managed several public safety crises in the city over the past several years. Do you agree that the city has failed to manage the violence specifically?
No, I don't agree that we have failed to manage the violence specifically. What we're in is a new environment where we have multiple public safety crises taking place at the same time. We have a police bureau that is overtaxed in terms of personnel. I have pledged that we won't just sit on our hands. We're actually moving forward on strategies to give the police bureau the appropriate personnel, the tools, the training, and the resources they need in order to be able to do their jobs effectively in this new environment. And we also need to continue to put community voices front and center around reform. And that's the kind of things we've been talking about on this call today, around accountability, around transparency, around making sure that we are focusing the right resources towards the right problem. I don't see this as a time for us to sit around and lick our wounds and complain about the way the world is. I see this as an opportunity for us to refocus and be energized and make the changes we need to make in order to be successful in protecting the community's safety in this new environment.
Simon Gutierrez.
Mr. Mayor, this one for you. With a follow-up, if I'm allowed. Hi, how are you doing?
Yeah, of course.
You mentioned community organizations. We've been hearing a lot about community organizations ever since the adjustment of the funding for the police bureau, where there was funding redirected, I think some $6 million from the bureau. The idea was it would be given to community-led organizations to reduce gun violence. I've asked time and time again, and I can't for the life of me figure out what, if anything, these community organizations are doing with that money. Do you have anything on that?
I do, and I'm going to turn it over to Haley, and I may follow up as well, and then I'll let you ask your follow-up as well, Simon.
Hello, everyone. Haley Blonsley here. So far, OVP and CSD have been working to get this money out in 4 phases. To date, 2 phases are complete with a little over $1 million going into the community-based organizations who are working on gun violence reduction and the provision of wraparound services. By the end of this month, pending council's final approval, phase 3 will be completed and an additional $2 million will be dispersed into the community. The final phase, the 4th phase, OVP is working on to disperse an additional $1.4 million in the next month or so out into the community as well. So we are making good progress on getting the funds out. Thank you.
And Simon, if I could just add, the funding specifically goes towards upstream interventions as directed by the council. That would include things for youth who might be tempted to engage with affiliated groups or gangs or otherwise get involved with gun violence, to find other healthier alternatives. And that could include educational opportunities, after school opportunities, community and family support and help. We know all of those things can make an impact upstream on reducing violence downstream.
Thank you, Mayor. And briefly on the focused intervention team, last I checked, there were very few officers interested in joining that team. Are we in a different spot now? Do we have some folks that are applying?
Yeah, I believe we are at a different spot. We now have a top flight leadership team. As I say, we've got a robust pool of candidates for the 2 sergeant positions. And frankly, I think it was, it's difficult to ask people to take on a role when they're not entirely clear who's going to be running the show. In other words, it's probably too ambitious to ask people to apply for a job when they don't know who they're working for. Now that we know who the command staff is, and we have a better idea of who the sergeants are, we're hearing more enthusiasm on the part of rank and file officers. But I'd love to give the chief an opportunity to answer this question as well.
Hi, Simon. Yeah, I believe the mayor's correct in his assessment of fit going forward. We initially posted the sergeant positions and the officer positions together when we did this the first time. And I think that was probably an error on our part. We should have posted the sergeant positions first, made those selections, and then relied on the sergeants to help recruit the officers. And that's the approach we're taking this time around. Now that we have the fit cog in place, they'll be a part of the selection process. And I think that's really in alignment with what the vision was for this unit going forward.
Thank you.
Elise Haas.
Thanks, Chief.
This question's for the mayor. So Mayor Wheeler, I had reached out to your office multiple times in regards to a recent shooting in the Piedmont neighborhood over the holiday weekend. I sent you information about how a 3-year-old boy was just feet away from gunfire while riding his scooter on the sidewalk in front of his home, while 6 other young kids were in their yards about 30 feet from this shootout between men in these cars that were racing through the neighborhood. The families would like to know, what accountability do you feel resides with you? And what actions are you and your office taking to prevent our community's young children from being shot at and near gunfire while they're playing in their neighborhoods? And also, I'm just curious what the reasoning was for you not addressing the family when I was originally asking for comment about the video footage of the shooting.
Well, I honestly can't answer that question because I don't know anything about that particular outreach to the office, but I'll get directly to your question about accountability and the steps going forward. I feel highly accountable for community safety. That's part of the reason I'm standing here today in front of the press, outlining the steps that we're taking now, outlining what we're going to be doing in the future, being honest and transparent about some of the gaps that currently exist in our system. And I'm doing what I need to do as one leader in this community to make sure that we're providing adequate tools, training, personnel, and resources within the Police Bureau, making sure that we continue to support the community-based interventions along the lines of what the council supported recently, the $6 million being deployed towards community groups, honoring the community's insistence that if we redeploy a team of police officers focused on gun violence and intervention, that it have appropriate community oversight as it does in the FITCOG. So I am doing what I believe is necessary as a leader in this community to turn the tide. And Chief, I don't know if you have any specifics on that particular instance that you'd like to share. He'll be up in a second.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that particular incident was documented, and we're investigating that. There's some evidence that we're able to gather to investigate that. And as the mayor said, we take public safety seriously in the city. It's painful to see community members injured and shot and wounded by gunfire in our streets. And we're doing everything we can on our part to get the focus intervention team up and running. We've got ECST investigating many cases. They've submitted over 100 to the DA's office or U.S. Attorney's office for investigation. And we've recovered over 800 firearms year to date as well. We're 3/4 the way through the year. And last year we recovered 866. So we're out there working with the resources we have. We're looking at ways to add more. And we really want people to feel safe and be able to go out in the community and not worry about gun violence.
One thing I forgot to mention to the reporters here, if you could please introduce yourselves and the agency that you work with before your question. I think that'll work out well. Alex, you had a follow-up question?
Yeah, thank you. My follow-up was just about my earlier question about officers being rehired. It sounds like that is just filling spaces that they would leave open when they left. So aside from that, Mayor Wheeler, are you planning on proposing expanding the number of police officers total during the fall budget monitoring process at all? Is that something that is on your mind?
Yeah, thank you, Alex, for the question and the clarification. So there's two phases to this. The first is getting more officers on the street immediately. And the way to do that immediately is through the rehire process. So that I expect, resources permitting, and again, I don't have the fall bump projections yet, but resources permitting, I would absolutely prioritize bringing a recommendation to council to fund a significant number of rehires immediately in the near term in the fall bump process. So that would happen between now and October. Longer term, I've asked the Director Mike Myers and his team to work with Chief Lovell on a longer term staffing strategy. I have said many times, I believe our police bureau is under-resourced, but I want an evidence-based approach to how many officers we need to hire and what gaps we have in the bureau that currently need to be filled. And then once we do that, we have to engage the community. The public has a vested interest in this process, and then bring it back to council for this upcoming budget cycle. As you know, once we complete the fall bump, the next step is looking at the next fiscal year budget cycle. There's plenty of time for us to get this right, and I've directed that it be an evidence-based approach to staffing.
Thank you, Alex. That was Alex Lenski from the Portland Mercury. Right, if you could introduce yourself and the agency you work with.
Yeah, it's Wright Gazaway with K2.
Hi, Wright.
On this gun violence plan, it was approved in April. It's September. This really feels like the first substantive update we've gotten from you and others. And I constantly hear from people in the community that it just doesn't feel like a priority. I mean, since April, there have been more than 550 shootings, more than 150 people killed, injured, and 26 people killed. These people just feel like it's not a priority. What do you say to people who feel like addressing the violence is not a priority for you?
Yeah, it's disappointing. There is lots of good work that's happening at the council level, certainly at the bureau level, certainly within the police bureau, within the Office of Violence Prevention, the collaborations we have in place with our county partners and others. There is a lot of work going on in the community. And I think the frustration on the part of the public is they need to see results. Ultimately, accountability means reducing the gun violence in this community. And all of the steps that we're talking about, whether it's the enhanced community safety team, which hit the streets several months ago, which provides investigative follow-up for each and every shooting at the level that each and every shooting deserves, whether it's the deployment of the focused intervention team, but respecting the desire of the community to have that team have appropriate accountability and transparency with the public, or whether it's the additional dollars that we are deploying through the Office of Violence Prevention or through Director Myers' operation. All of these things combined, I believe, will make a difference in reducing gun violence in our community, but it's not going to happen instantly. It will require continued support and continued investments. And as the mayor, I'm 100% committed to all of the above.
Specifically,
I believe my colleagues are as well.
Specifically, though, it's the people who want some of this funding for grants that are doing work in the community. Mm-hmm. They don't understand the city procurement process, and they feel like they get the runaround, and they feel like it's been 5 months, and to them, that just seems like a long time, and they don't feel like it's a priority given how much time has passed and how many people are continuing to get shot.
Well, I'm sorry they feel that way, and there are probably ways we could speed the process up. It was a very deliberate process. We were very transparent about it up front, that the first tranche would go towards community organizations where we already work with them. We already know what they're capable of. We know what gaps they can fill immediately. Those resources have already gone out the door. The second tranche includes new organizations that we haven't previously worked with. And before we turn over funding to organizations, we want to make sure that they have a very explicit work plan in terms of what outcomes they're expecting, how they will invest the resources, who will do the resources, and who will get the resources, and what their accountability measures will be. And I realize that takes some time, and we have to balance that against the sense of urgency all of us feel around reducing gun violence. But again, people expect results, and ultimately will be held accountable by the results we get, not by how quickly we shovel money out the door. For me, this is about outcomes.
Thank you, Wright. Shane Kavanaugh, can you introduce yourself?
Hi there.
Hi, Shane.
Shane Dixon Kavanaugh from the Oregonian here. Mayor, following up on Wright's question here, yesterday during the community safety work session, we heard your colleague, Commissioner Mingus Mapps, sort of put an actual target on what he would like to see in terms of gun violence reduction in the city over a set period of time. He said he'd like to see gun violence reduced by 20% within the next 15 months. And I can't recall you or other members of the city council actually putting a goal or target like that out there. And I wanted to know if you supported or were supportive of the idea of setting a hard target like that over a period of time.
I am all about outcomes, and outcomes include both the target and the timeline, but it includes more than that. You can't just say, I want to reduce gun violence by 20% in 15 months. You also have to talk about what interventions and what investments you're willing to make to be able to do that. And so today I've been talking about the investments that I'm willing to make. Again, I would just mention that I have supported investments not only in the community, but also investments in the police bureau and standing up the enhanced community safety team around investigations and the focused intervention team around intervention and prevention. All of these things have to be discussed as part of the larger package. But yeah, of course, we should be talking about what we are able to do. I can't sit here today and commit to a particular percentage decrease without knowing what resources are currently available. And as I say, I won't know till the end of next week what resources are actually available to make the investments necessary to reach whatever goals it is we decide to set as a council. But obviously, both of these are really critical components. It's setting a target and being transparent about the achievement of that target over a certain period of time, but you also have to be willing to make the investments and pursue the strategies so that you can achieve those targets. It's got to all happen at once.
So, Mayor, at this point in time, I'm just curious, like, when do you think would be a reasonable amount of time, starting today going forward, that the city of Portland and the people who live here should expect to see a reduction in gun violence? Because the council passed its violence reduction plan back in April. That was 5 months ago, and gun violence has only continued to increase. So, I mean, what are we thinking about in terms of time frame here? When can people expect to see results?
Yeah, this is a question being asked nationally, not just here in the city of Portland. I can tell you this: we won't see the results without the investments and without the strategies at the street level. The changes have to happen on the ground. The council took the first step with the community groups some number of months ago. Those investments are starting to work their way in the community. As the chief and I have discussed, we've already deployed the enhanced community safety team. We're close to deploying the focused intervention team. We're continuing to work with all manner of community partners on some of the upstream solutions. So I would hope we would see that reduction or the turning of the tide soon.
But at this point in time,
I can't give you a specific time frame, obviously.
So at this point in time, the city can't actually tell Portlanders when the tide might be turned here.
Well, I don't like to mislead people. I like to treat them like adults. And so rather than putting a fiction out there, here's what I know factually. I know for a fact that if we invest in the enhanced community safety team, I know for a fact if we continue to fund a fully deployed focused intervention team, I know for a fact if we continue to invest in the Office of Violence Prevention and the great work they do in the community, along with our other community partners, all of these things are known to be interventions that will reduce gun violence. That's what I know. That's what I'm going to continue to fight for. And as we know what resources are available and what scale we can deploy these resources, we'll be in a better position to be able to set specific targets.
Thank you, Mayor.
Look, it's very easy to say, I want to reduce gun violence by 20% in 15 months. The hard part is actually deploying the strategies and the resources to make it happen. And that's where I'm focusing my attention and my energy.
Yeah, I just recognize that, like, the city has targets for, like, reducing carbon emissions by a certain point in time, but you don't actually have targets for reducing gun violence.
We do have targets for reducing emissions. That's based on data and best evidence and scientific studies that show that we have to reduce carbon emissions by a certain amount by a certain time in order to turn the tide around global climate change. That is based on evidence as opposed to just pulled out of the air. And it's also based on the fact that we have sustainable sources of funding for those practices. We're building new infrastructure here to address the growing gun violence problem in our community. And in many cases, we're doing it from scratch. And so I would ask for the public's patience as we do this. I believe the public is unified behind the strategies that I've identified. I believe the council is unified, and I believe they will make an important difference.
Thank you, Shane. Simon Gutierrez.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. One differentiation here. The council voted you as well, to eliminate the gun violence reduction team back a couple years ago. Now we've got basically another version of the gun violence reduction team with the focused intervention team. How is this going to be any different than the previous incarnation?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. And I think it's really important to take a step back and remember the context of this. It was only about a year ago that we had tens of thousands of people demonstrating in the city of Portland for police reforms. Some of those individuals were calling for a reduction in funding or a redeployment of funding from the Portland Police Bureau to other services. The primary example being held up at that point was the then GVRT. And there had been 2 or 3 city audits that had shown that that process that was being used by the Portland Police Bureau led to disproportionate outcomes. So in a sense, the GVRT model had been discredited. What I committed to at that time and what I'm delivering on now is a new model that embraces the best of what the GVRT did, which was the community engagement, building long-term relations in the community. We had some fantastic officers deployed in that unit who are really good at maintaining those community contacts. I'm grateful that we've brought some of those individuals back as leaders of this new unit. But what is fundamentally different is we are doing it with community engagement. The FITCOG, the Focused Intervention Team Community Oversight Group, works alongside of us to hold us accountable in terms of transparency and accountability and data. They've been working with us to help identify the top candidates for this team. And I believe that's absolutely necessary in the city of Portland, that we work alongside the community to have a gun violence intervention team that has the support of the community. If it has the support of the community, it will have the support of the council. So it's really important that those two things stay aligned.
Thank you, Mayor. I forgot to mention KPTV here.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Simon. Maxine?
Thank you again. So I recall that in April, there was a lot of urgency to get this focused intervention team up and running.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're saying that it likely won't be operational until late November, and that's after what we've already experienced, fairly substantial deadly summer. Can you or the chief explain the tactic? Why couldn't Chief Lovell appoint officers to the team and have it operational earlier?
Yes, I'm going to let the chief answer that. I have my own answer, but it probably aligns closely with the chief's answer. Chief?
Hi, Maxine. The answer to that question from my perspective is, this is our third iteration of this team in recent history. We had gang enforcement team. We shifted from that model to focus on gun violence and had the gun violence reduction team. And those were great officers that did a lot of great work in the community. And those two efforts proved unsustainable. It was really important for me to look at how can we put this together in a way that's going to let these officers be successful, let this effort be sustainable. That's very important. And the community oversight piece that the mayor spoke to is an important part of that. They're really there to provide collaboration and insight into the operational piece of that work that we're going to do. And I thought it was important to let them have a voice in the selection of people. And I want people that want to do the work, people that are committed to this type of work. And I felt like just appointing people, forcing them to a different shift and making them do that work wasn't the right decision. I really wanted the community piece to have its voice in the selection of these officers and to really be collaborative through the whole process and be able to give support that I think was honestly missing from the time when we had gang enforcement team and the gun violence reduction team.
There's really nothing I can add to the chief's answer. That was just to underscore again, it's important to move forward with community. And I remind people that GVRT was the subject of several audits, and the audit in particular pointed out the lack of community engagement and involvement as being one of the most significant issues that we had to address. And we believe we have begun to address that. The chief also mentioned that this is specialty work. It requires a certain type of person with a certain type of attitude. There's some additional risk and liability that the officers are exposed to when they join this unit. And it's important from my perspective and the chief's perspective that the people who are in this unit are all in, that they're committed to the work, not there because they have to be, but there because they believe they can make a difference and they want to be there.
Thank you, Maxine. That was Maxine Bernstein from Oregonian, right?
Sorry about that. Thank you.
No worries.
I'm happy to go. I noticed that Jonathan Levinson had his hand up for a while. Can you come to me right after him?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's. Thank you for doing that, right? Jonathan, can you introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Wright. Thank you, Rich. This is Jonathan Levinson from Oregon Public Broadcasting. I'm wondering, Mayor, if you have an update on part of that April gun violence ordinance, that $6 million was to hire more park rangers and for them to establish a restorative justice program. I'm wondering if you have an update on that.
I do, and I want to put my usual admonition out, given our form of government. I'm not the commissioner in charge of the Parks Bureau or this process, but I know that there are 24 positions that were authorized. I believe they've completed the hiring of 10 of those positions, and there are others that are coming in the near term.
Thank you, Jonathan. And Wright, did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, it's actually about the park rangers. It's no secret there's a finite amount of resources here. The city approved $1.4 million to add these park rangers in a plan to address gun violence. Many don't see the connection between unarmed park rangers and the violence we're seeing on the streets. There was a shooting Monday where a truck of park rangers was actually hit. Was it a mistake to spend so much money expanding this program, given the amount of violence we're seeing?
No, it most certainly was not a mistake to expand the park ranger program. I've been a long-term supporter of the park ranger program. I've expanded it multiple times in several of the budgets that I've proposed to the city council. They play multiple roles in terms of having a public presence and being good ambassadors in the parks. And yes, they are also eyes on the parks. They are uniformed. They are there. The public likes seeing the park rangers in the parks. It gives them a sense that if something does happen in the parks, there's an official from the city of Portland who is in close proximity to any other resources in our community, including the police bureau, to make appropriate calls and get support if necessary. And I know some of you showed up with me not too long ago at a fatal shooting that in fact took place in one of our parks. And it was in broad daylight in the middle of a beautiful day when there were kids, there were adults, there were families. It was right next to a church where there was activities going on. And so having those eyes and ears in the park, I think, is important. I would not say it is necessarily the fundamental capstone of our gun violence reduction program, but I do think it's an element that's appreciated by the community. And certainly with more people using our parks during the pandemic, with more pressure on our parks, having more people there to identify problems, whether it's related to potential conflict in the parks or whether it's related to livability issues or other issues, I think is a positive.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wright. That was Wright Gasway from K2. Devin?
This message for the chief. This is Devin Haskins with KGW News. I'm going to kind of go onto a different topic just shortly. Chief, can you talk about Penny Harrington's passing, kind of what she meant to the department, and any thoughts you have to share about her?
Yeah, I heard that this morning as I was coming into work, and very sad. I don't know how many of you know Penny Harrington. She was a pioneer here at the Police Bureau, our former chief. She was the first female officer to hold many ranks, I believe sergeant, lieutenant, captain. And when she became chief, she was the first major city chief in America who was a female. I sent out a tweet this morning, just sending condolences to her family. But yeah, she's definitely a legend here at the Police Bureau, and we're very, very, very sad to hear about her passing. And I appreciate you remembering her today. Thank you.
Did you ever meet her when you became chief? Did you guys ever have any conversations?
No, I've never met her. There are several folks in our communications office who have been around the police bureau for a long time, who were in contact with her up until fairly recently. But I've never had the pleasure to meet her.
Thank you.
Sure.
And right, if I could also just add an addendum, as I was off to the side here, I was thinking the question regarding the park rangers, I do just want to remind people that back in March, I did support a community-based approach that included park rangers, it included community investments, but it also requested funding for the police intervention and prevention. And I championed that, I supported that. The council was not ready to make that investment at the time. They wanted more information, but the chief and I agreed to fund both the enhanced community safety team and the focused intervention team using internal resources. And I believe we're at an important stage in terms of the deployment of the focused intervention team. And I just want to remind people that the police piece of this is still very much in play under my leadership.
Thank you, Devin. I don't see any more hands up. Was there any additional questions before we close out? And Maxine?
Thank you. It's Maxine Bernstein from the Oregonian. Mayor, I wanted to find out, I understand with the DOJ talks, they've said that they want the city to equip officers with body-worn cameras as part of the remedies for non-compliance with the settlement. And I wondered what steps are being taken to do that, and also funding for those cameras.
Yeah, thank you, Maxine. And I am enthusiastically supportive of body-worn cameras, ultimately for all of our Portland police officers. It is an essential element to transparency and accountability. And by the way, most of our police officers also strongly support the deployment of body-worn cameras for their own protection. The Department of Justice had also made it clear that if we were to deploy those cameras, it was very important that certain policies be in place. For example, they had indicated they would only support the policy if during critical events, officers were not able to review the footage prior to making their initial report or having their initial interview. That, of course, is an issue that is subject to collective bargaining. That's part of the process we're going through right now at the table with the PPA. And there will be funding that is set aside. Again, this is based on what I know today. I've not yet seen the fall bump numbers. I don't know what resources we're working with, but it is my full expectation that as an act of good faith, as part of the settlement agreement, that I will be bringing a proposal to the council as part of the fall bump, which will be held in reserve for the next several months for the purpose of jump-starting the body-worn camera program. And by the time we're done with our negotiations with the PPA, we'll know whether or not we've got the right policies in place that we need in order to make the program effective.
All right. I don't see any more questions in the queue. If anyone does have an additional question, go ahead and raise your hand. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and close out here.
Hey, Rich, if I could just say, I really appreciate people being on this call today. And I know there is a balancing act in terms of information that the press would like. I'm prepared to do this more often as long as people in the media feel that this is a good use of your time as well. I believe it is in the best interest of the public for me to have these opportunities, but it would be great to hear just individually, not right now, but individually, whether you think these are useful sessions or how you might change them to make them more effective, both for you as well as for the listening public. I'd very much welcome that feedback.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Chief Lovell. Thank you, all of you from the media who showed up for this frank and very respectful conversation. And I did post an email address in the chat. You guys can send follow-up questions for. Otherwise, we're going to close out. Thanks again.
All right.